standing behind the sort of podium here and talking. But if you have questions or you want to have a discussion, happy to do it. Just let me know. Again, I can't give you, if you're going to raise specific issues about certain things that are going on specifically, I may not be able to address things specifically. I may have to just stay kind of at a broader level. But we'll play it by ear. So here's the statute that we're talking about. What's a meeting? And this is critical. This is a relatively new statute. We've always treated electronic communication as a meeting. I mean, for years, telephones, email, things like that. Recently, the legislature sort of caught up. Now it's specifically in the statute that you can have a meeting by way of an email or other electronic communications. And we'll talk in more detail about emails. Basically, this kind of is how do you avoid an open meeting law violation? That's kind of the whole point here. And we're not talking about getting around it or finding loopholes, but how to do things as best you can to avoid getting a complaint like you got from the AG's office or a finding. We'll also talk about social media, which is a little different, and talk about regular mainstream media and how that's a little different as well from, or how that's treated differently from open meeting law. Okay, so back to the basics. What's a core board business or district business? It's a meeting. 3 people talking about the Monday Night Football game that you saw Sunday Night Football game you saw last night, not a meeting. So if you specifics, discuss, propose, deliberate, or take legal action. That constitutes a meeting if 3 of you meet. And again, we'll get into this, but it doesn't have to be 3 people in a room at the same time. You can have sort of serial communications. So we'll talk again in detail about that and how to be careful to not have those kinds of discussions in a serial manner. So, if 2 people show up for an agendized meeting, and that's it, you don't have a meeting, break up, go home, reschedule. Resist the temptation to sort of discuss the things that are on your agenda. Because if 2 people have that discussion, and then one of those 2 people has a discussion with the 3rd person later on about what the 2 discussed, you've had a meeting, right? So, and obviously the public shows up, and there's only 2 people, say, hey, sorry folks, can't have a meeting today, we're short a quorum, and you move on. Okay, agendas. This is probably more towards your sort of board clerk responsibilities, but I noticed in reading your policies about agendas and things like that, a lot of that's up to the chief and to the board chairperson to put the agenda together. But these are sort of the minimum requirements of your agenda. And notice, technically there's a notice and an agenda. Most places do a notice and agenda all in one document. Notice of the meeting, when, where, what time, and then what's actually going to be discussed. Don't think, from what I've seen, that your agendas pose any kind of problems. Things like old business, new business, you should avoid using those. I don't think you do. Minimum 24-hour. Yes, sir.
I mean, we do, but only as like a descriptive heading, and then we have the specific breakouts.
Right.
Details.
That's fine because you're descriptive. If you have a category, old business, and then you put the specific items you're going to discuss, that's fine. Just a generic old business and new business, you should avoid that. Minimum 24-hour public notice. I don't know if our policies are broader. Ours are 48, right? So for the city, so we have to meet our own requirements. If it's an ordinance, it's even longer. So we have to be kind of careful about that. And then, of course, there's an exception for an actual and true emergency. But so just try to be careful. Stick to the agenda, right? So you kind of have to find that balance between something specific enough to let the public know what you're talking about, but if it's too specific, you may actually limit what you can talk about. So it's always kind of a tension to get enough information out there to the public Oh, and normally too, by the way, we post, and I don't know how you do it, but what we do is we have, for every item, we have a council memo. So it's coming through staff. Staff generates every item that gets on the agenda at some level, Public Works, Parks and Rec, Police Department, Legal, sometimes. And so the council memo is part of the agenda, so you can find them electronically on our website. So if you have those sort of staff memos that discuss the item to kind of prep you as a board in order to, in advance of the discussion, those are always good to have on your website if they're available. We try to make them available Thursday prior to Tuesday meeting. So our agendas are usually posted Thursdays prior to Tuesday, plus all of the staff memos, council memos we call them, are also on the website by Thursday afternoon, generally speaking. Sometimes the last minute item comes up, we add it in as long as we meet the 24-hour requirement. Call the public.
One quick
yes.
question before I get to that. This is a public meeting,
This is an open meeting, yes.
open meeting, so
Right.
we are supposed to be recording minutes, who's present,
Believe you are.
and those will be,
Right.
but any open meeting, there needs to be minutes taken and,
Yes.
and the general discussion.
Minutes taken. Now, I know for cities, we have, I think specific to cities, we have 3 days to get the result online on our website. And then you have, because our minutes, if we have sometimes our minutes aren't formally approved for a month. It just takes that long for the clerk to get them prepared. But the actual item, how it was voted on, who voted, yays, nays, abstain, absent, whatever, we post that within 3 days, because that's pretty easy to do. But yes, so every meeting that you have, if you have a quorum and you're going to discuss district business, needs to be, it's a public meeting, but open, I think open meeting is the better terminology to use, open meeting. And then we'll get into a little bit, you have executive sessions. So you have 2 kinds of meetings, you have your open meeting and your executive session. A subset of the open meeting is a public hearing. Not everything, the public isn't entitled to speak at a meeting, right? So it's usually up to the board chairperson to whether or not he or she's going to allow the public to comment on a particular agenda item, unless you have a specific requirement that this item has to have at least 1 public hearing. So for cities, we talk about rezonings, always have to have at least 1 public hearing. I don't know specifically for districts, I'm assuming budget time, you have to have a public hearing, in addition to being an open meeting. So the public isn't necessarily, and I'll get into a little bit, isn't entitled necessarily to speak, but it's up to, it's kind of your practice and policy, whether you're going to allow the public to speak or comment on every item. So, getting into that, and this is probably where you may, well, I'm going to just say, I would never do these as a government lawyer, call the public. I think you run the risk of open meeting law violation. And the Attorney General's office for at least 10 years has recommended against doing calls to the public. Because the problem is it's not an agendized item. And there's a lot of temptation for a council person or a director or a board member to respond. And you have some limited ability to respond. I know your policies, like personal attack you're allowed to respond to, and some other things. But this is risky to do an unagendized call to the public. It's a policy decision that this board would have to make, whether to continue to do it or not. But from a purely open meeting law standpoint, it's a high risk venture. Now, and how we in Prescott do it, we did it in, when I was at Glendale, we did it in Glendale. And I can't tell you how many times I have to stop a council person or the mayor from responding. Do I get to respond? Well, Mayor, that's a personal attack. I should be able to respond. No, Mayor, they were criticizing your vote on something from 2 weeks ago. It's not a personal attack, they're raising an issue, probably shouldn't respond. Well, I want to respond. So it's very, I just think from, I guess, a purely open meeting law concept, these things are dangerous. You can, if you're going to continue to do it, I would limit any reaction, even if it's a personal attack. Now, I would, again, from a purely legal standpoint, I would even avoid responding to the personal attack because it's risky, right? You gotta just suck it up. You're an elected official. You gotta take it. You can direct staff to go do something. You can direct staff to put on the next agenda and talk about it. What we do in Prescott is we have 7 council people. So rather than have a call in public, any public member could ask a council person to put something on an upcoming agenda. And if 2 council people are there, want to put something on the agenda, it can go on the next available agenda. That's how we sort of, I guess, respond to the public by public requests. But, and we have, we have study sessions and we have voting meetings. During our voting meetings, we have presentations, which we limit to 5 minutes, where if it's something within the jurisdiction of the city, and two council members want to sign this person up to speak, they can. Ultimately, it's the mayor, the clerk, the manager, and myself that do what's called an agenda review. We sit down and we basically set the next agenda for the next available meeting. It's usually about 2 weeks out. I will tell you that we get so much stuff from staff, from all of our departments coming up, that there's very little ability to squeeze something in from just a purely sort of public request. Again, if it's a public presentation, for instance, somebody wanted to talk about public gardens, 5-minute presentation, cool. I want to build public gardens in the city for the people of Prescott to grow their own food. Not something they're going to vote on, just a generic kind of presentation about public gardens. Somebody else wanted to talk about Nelson Mandela in South Africa. It's like, man, we don't do international policy, right? Not our lane. We don't get involved in that. So it's not something that really fits within what the city of Prescott needs to be talking about in, and talking to your attorney. You've got a meeting starting with me going till 7 o'clock maybe tonight or so. So it's important that you spend your time actually being productive. And if somebody's going to come here and talk, want to do a presentation, for instance, about something that's so far outside of your jurisdiction, you've got a lot of business you got to take care of. So, but this is something that you may want to talk about in the future, debate, discuss, and then sort of alternative ways or options of members of the public from perhaps doing presentations or making requests to get something on an agenda. I would never, by the way, for a 5-member group, we're super cautious, right? We're very conservative. 2 people can get something on an agenda, generally speaking. 2 council members. We avoid 3 or 4 because, again, the temptation is there to not just talk about, hey, I want to get something on the agenda, but let's talk a little bit about where I want to go with it. And again, so we'll get into that a little bit, but for your group, if you're going to do something like that, I would do no more than 2 people to get something on an agenda, and then sort of set some ground rules about what types of things the public can present. And then you can agendize it. You can actually put on public presentation. We limit them to no more than 3. But sometimes we'll limit them to 1 because the agenda's so packed with stuff. So we'll have Ernest A. Love Day's presentation. The rodeo guys will come in and do a 5-minute presentation. That kind of stuff. And the problem is a 5-minute presentation turns into a 10-minute presentation, right? So if you put 3 on there, we aren't even at our consent agenda until a 3 o'clock meeting until 3:45. Because you go through all the other stuff they have. So, something to think about, calls to the public, like I said, the AG's frowned on them since I was in Glendale, probably 2003, 2004. It's just a risky thing to do. The tension being, well, we want to hear from the public. Okay, so that's kind of thing, you kind of have to deal with that. At some point, you can deal with it. So back to kind of the format. The notice exception, if you have an actual emergency, you can actually have a meeting without the 24-hour. So if, for instance, if there's fire and you need to have a board meeting about something, you can actually have the meeting in less than 24 hour notice if it's declared actual emergency. And that's and there's a process for doing that. If something, if you're having something as agendized and you can't get to it, and you want to have the meeting that next day, for instance, as a follow-on because it's getting late or you may lose a quorum or something, you can announce at the meeting, we're going to continue this item until tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. When I was in Sedona, we had a midnight rule where you couldn't start a new item after midnight because we would start our meetings at 7 o'clock. And on certain things, you have 100 people wanting to talk about it, right? Certain rezonings or projects, things like that. So you can imagine people start to, you just get tired. And so we couldn't start a new item until after midnight. The rule generally was, okay, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, we'll finish up the meeting. So you can do that as long as you announce at the meeting. Okay, you must comply. Obviously, this is a simple one. You all, if you form any kind of subcommittees or does this board have committees or subcommittees of it? Okay, so those subcommittees have to comply. Are they members of this board? So what are your subcommittees? Are they 2 people?
Just well,
Or
we also have PSPRS.
There'd be like one person assigned to look at PSPRS.
oh, you're PSPRS.
One person to look at talk to PRCC.
Okay, got it.
But it's just one person and they give a simple report back to the board.
Yeah, that's more. I would call it more a liaison rather than a subcommittee. However,
So the agency, because of the arrangement now, where most of those functions are pushed up to CAFMA,
okay,
that's primarily up at the CAFMA level rather than here. There used to be one, for example, for the Reserve Firefighters Pension Fund. There used to be one for the PSPRS, workers' comp. There were 2 or 3 subcommittees like that.
Excuse me, is CAFMA then a larger?
It is. It's the combined entity, CAFMA.
Got
It
it.
is the CYFD and Chino Valley Joint
Okay.
Powers Authority.
So a point of that is if this board were to want to do a committee, you could only do a 2-person committee because a 3-person committee is a meeting of the whole board, right? You have a quorum. So you kind of have to be careful. Obviously, your PSPRS board is a public body, has to comply with open meeting law.
We treated all of those
Right.
as open meeting law, public entities.
Right. Okay, so what can you do? You can take legal action and properly notice an agendized meeting. That's what a public body does in public. On agendized items, meet, discuss, deliberate, and take legal action. The only exception is your authorized exec sessions. So let's talk a little bit about that. There's 7 bases for going to exec session. These are the 5 most common. I think other one is discussions with tribes, and there's another one I can't remember. But these are the most common. For instance, discussion of confidential information would be your PSPRS board talking about a firefighter's medical record, about making a decision on a medical retirement, for instance. They obviously would want to do that in an E-session because there's HIPAA and all kinds of privacy issues. Legal advice, it's a standard. Talking personnel matters, this board hires or fires people. You can talk about those in exec session. Remember your 24-hour notice to the person you're talking to, because that person has the right to pull that item to a public meeting. But if that person chooses not to hold to a public meeting, he or she doesn't have the right to be in the exec session. So you can talk about someone in the exec session without them being there, as long as they get that 24-hour notice about being able to have their discussion in an open meeting. And then, you know, you're dealing with union or labor type groups, obviously. And then, so you know, these are business deals, settlement contracts, all the stuff that you're gonna buy a piece of property, you don't wanna have a public discussion about the highest you're gonna offer, right? You're gonna when you're gonna negotiate a deal, you don't wanna do that in public. This is just common sense stuff. The top bullet point is sort of, it's sort of in the statute, sort of not, right? I mean, but as a general rule, your attorney should be the one making that if you're gonna wanna go into exec session, your attorney needs to be the one who makes that call. Because they're gonna be able to make sure that you're doing it right and you're covered and that and things are done properly. The only exception to that rule would be, if you're gonna talk about your attorney's personnel matter. I mean, that's what would be the exception to the rule. But even then, I would still make sure that the attorney's okay with it, you're doing it right? Because remember, all this stuff, there's a sort of a general rule out there is that if you follow the advice of your attorney, you get immunity, you get indemnification, you're not personally going to be liable for things that you do as a public official. So it's always good to follow the attorney's advice as best you can, or go the other way, avoid not following legal advice, because then you can be personally liable on many things. Okay, executive session, who can go? Obviously, the board, person subject to a personnel discussion may go, but he or she, that person can be excused. So for instance, I get my annual review from my council, I go into the exec session, I sort of give an outline of what the department did last year, what we're looking to do next year, and then it's like, excuse yourself, and they go out, and they talk about me, and then I come back in, and we talk a little bit more, and hopefully maybe get a raise, or maybe get a pat on the back, or something like that. So that's kind of the standard format. And then last but not least, you don't want to have your exec sessions open to just any employee. They really need to be sort of critical to the topic. It's a little different, for instance, because the city obviously has a much broader, jurisdiction. But if we're going to talk about something related to, say, public works in an exec session, maybe a lawsuit or something, we're not going to have the parks director there, because you can actually lose your privilege and confidentiality if you have people in the room that have no reason to be there. So just kind of be careful about that, about who's invited, who's in the exec session, who's not. I know it's kind of interesting. So we have our clerk attend the exec session to take minutes in Glendale. We would actually excuse the clerk and have one of the secretaries from the legal department come down and take the minutes. I mean, I don't think that's critical, but it just all depends on kind of how you want to run it. Okay, so, and then in reading Mr. Skinner's letter, this is important. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in exec session stays in exec session. You can't go out and talk about it publicly. You should be getting, and I assume you're getting an admonition at the beginning of every exec session. This is confidential. You shouldn't discuss this thing, with the exception of investigations by the Auditor General or Attorney General when they're investigating about that alleged violation of the meeting law, so on and so forth. So maintain confidentiality. It's really critical. Think of it as, if you're in the military or if you've been in the military, classified discussions. You cannot release classified information, right? I mean, secret, top secret, whatever you want to call it. It's classified, it's got to stay secret. It's got to, At the same time, let's say you're going to discuss a lawsuit settlement. The discussion of the settlement in exec session stays private. If you're going to approve the settlement, you got to go agendize it and approve the settlement. You approve the, so, and everybody's got a different take on it. We just put the settlement agreement right as part of the council packet and have that discussion, and we settle for whatever the number is. If it's above, in our case, if it's about 25,000, we have to have council approval. I have authority to settle for 25,000. So, but we just take it and go to public, and we settle it, and because the public, in my view, has the right to know that we're settling a lawsuit, and the reasons why. Now, we are, as probably you are, we're insured by a risk pool. So, more often than not, the risk pool, especially if it's a big number case, which we haven't had recently, is saying, we're settling this case. And it's like, okay. Then we take it to the council and we settle it. Yes.
Sorry, not a risk pool at this stage, although we're working on that.
Do you have an insurance company now? We would identify it as insurance. So if your insurer says, hey, this claim that your fire truck, ran a red light and didn't have lights and sirens on and they crushed a minivan full of people, we're going to settle that claim. I mean, you don't have a whole hell of a lot of choice. You're going to settle that claim if your insurance company is saying settle the claim. There's been some debate amongst municipal lawyers that if the insurance company is settling the case, then you don't have to get public or council approval on it. Well, I disagree with that. I think for a couple of reasons. One is, if we have a $100,000 deductible on liability, we'll bring that to the council every day of the week and say, hey, there's $1 million case that's being settled. Thank God we have insurance because it's costing us $100,000 deductible, and the insurance company's paying us $900. And not the specific reasons why we're settling, but some of the broader policy issues. That this case would cost $500,000 to actually just litigate, and the chances of success are 50-50 or something. Some very broad things we put in our council memo to talk about it. We won't specifically talk about, hey, that driver, well, he turned out he popped for marijuana, so we're going to get screwed on the case. We got to settle. We would probably never come out and say, something like that. And that's probably hypothetical.
John?
Yes.
Question for you, because it's always seemed a little strange to me, but we have this ongoing legal matter that we go into executive session on, give instructions to the attorney, it's agendized under the ongoing business piece, but on the agenda, we just say, you got your instructions, you clear on what you're doing, done. No information is conveyed at all. Should we even be agendizing?
Are you going into exec session to discuss
The legal?
particular matter?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I may, let
Yeah.
me jump in on that, because we are not in a defense position in that case, we're plaintiffs in
Okay.
that particular matter. There are a series of settlement negotiations which are taking place. In public meeting, I'll reference what has occurred, for example, in a hearing, and I'll be discussing a hearing that took place on September 10 in that particular case and what the results of that were. But in terms of the status of the settlement and what's taking place on that, because those things haven't been finalized,
Right.
then that's an exec session. Once it is finalized, it'll come out and be part of the public session. And just as an aside, all of the defendants in that thing who always have confidentiality clauses in their settlement documents have heard from us on multiple occasions, and all of that's always
Yeah, it's
deleted because it's all going to be public, and that's
Right.
one of the things that's created a lot of consternation for those guys. But when something is finalized, it'll be out. So that's the way we're handling that piece. And similar when we're dealing with defense matters, because we were recently in a lengthy lawsuit related to Yarnell.
Right.
So, same routine, what was taking place publicly, public session,
yeah.
but legal
Yeah.
advice related to the underlying substance of the case,
Yeah,
executive session.
and I think that's the right. In other words, if you're going to get briefed about what happened in court, well, what happened in court's already public. So even though you're maybe talking about some legal stuff, it doesn't mean that it always has to be an exec session. I think when you get into, and obviously, we're sort of, you're not getting legal advice necessarily from me. I'm not your attorney, but I'm talking about legal stuff, and this is done in a public session. Nothing wrong with that. Oftentimes you'll get a question, or I'll get a look from my mayor, if somebody's going to tangent on a topic, and it's probably not an agendized item, probably need to rein that person back. And that's basically legal advice to the mayor. Hey, this person's going off topic, not an agendized item, potential violation of the meeting law. So I'm giving legal advice, I'm doing it publicly. So you don't always have to go in exec session, so you gotta make those as a judgment call. But again, you can all agree, or have consensus or whatever, to settle the case, and you can give your attorney direction, or the insurance company attorney's direction, you can go ahead and settle it for this amount. And then when all of the agreements are basically ready to go, then you go to the public hearing, and you approve it as a board, or at least you vote on it as a board, and then everything is signed and checks are written and all that. So, yeah, you can't reach any final agreement in any case in an exec session. So if you're talking about whether it's labor negotiations, or you're talking about personnel matters, hey, let's renew the chief's contract and give him a 3% raise. Well, that contract then subsequently goes to a public vote, right, at a subsequent meeting. That's how that kind of works. So the only thing I would say, you don't want to necessarily get into specifics in your public meeting about what's discussed at the exec session. Like I said, things that are actually confidential documents, things like that. Obviously, you don't want to get into great details. But broad enough so the public at least understands why you're making the decision you're making. So, okay, so this is just a definition. This is legal advice. Legal advice comes from lawyers. Different than what we talked about earlier, a legal decision. A legal decision is something that the board votes on. Legal advice is basically, legal advice on what the law is based on the facts of a particular instance. So you don't go to exec session, for instance, to avoid things that are embarrassing or that you want to sort of avoid talking about in public. There has to be a good reason to go to exec session, not just because something's, you want to avoid public scrutiny. So, any other questions on exec session stuff? All right, so this is kind of that was kind of how to do it. This is how not to do it. How to avoid pitfalls. Don't pull each other. It's not like Congress where you can cut deals in the back room. At least that's what they say. Limit your discussions. You have, the smaller the body, the harder it is to avoid open meeting law. It's very easy for two people to talk, and then it's relayed to a third person. Don't send emails to each other. Don't hit reply all. I mean, I don't know how many times I got to tell people, don't hit reply all. Why do you reply all? Even when you say don't reply all, somebody will inevitably reply all. Use your staff to distribute information. I'll go through a couple of samples of that. And again, if you don't have a quorum, you got to expand and schedule for another day. So polling, we talked about that. And then having this discussion deliberation between less than a quorum. And the best example, or the worst example, was there was a school district in Yavapai County. This was a number of years ago. I think it was a 7-member school district or school board. And so 3 members of the 7 guys, 3 guys sitting in a cafe talking, and then one guy would leave, and the other guy, the 4th guy would come in from his truck, and they feed him the information, and then, basically it was a half obvious attempt to avoid open meeting law. And the AG came out, this is probably in the late 90s, AG came and they're all removed because it was just such a, they didn't even try, And this is, of course, preceded for the most part the ability to do this electronically. So now, not only do you have a 5-member board, a relatively small group, so it's easy to have a board, you have so much ability to electronically communicate with each other that you could literally have a meeting and you could be in 5 different continents and have a meeting, right? I mean, so you got to just be really careful about that.
John,
Yes.
how do you, it's not an issue with Steve Blair on the radio when he talks?
I'm going to talk
against
about that in a
that.
second. Well, it is an issue with him on there. Just kidding.
Because it goes out to the other, I presume the other
I
guys.
just but I don't have to listen to that. So I will talk about social media and mainstream media in a bit on some of those things. Okay, so these are ways we talked. This is daisy chain serial communication. You talk to him, and you talk to him, and you talk to him. And you basically had a meeting because eventually it gets back to you, right? So that's it. Could be one way or it can be circular. Hub and spoke is you're using one person and he or she's going out talking to the other four. That's the hub, and the other four are the spoke. Serial communication again is one after the other, and we talked about polling. How do you vote? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So these are ways, and this is all done where nobody sees it, nobody knows about it. It can be done not in person, but electronically. So it's really easy now to violate a meeting law, right? Because you have the ability to use email, those kinds of things. So a two-way discussion, two-way communication, discuss, deliberate, take legal action. Again, different than legal advice. Legal action is actually making a decision, voting on something, basically. Back and forth among the quorum. And this is something that's really critical. A matter that could foreseeably become before you. So in this board, that's a fairly maybe narrow or limited scope of discussion. But it's not stuff that you have definitely agendized or might be agendized, but what could reasonably come before you. So basically district business. Anything that deals with, essentially Yavapai Fire District is, purchasing fire trucks, hiring more people, tax rates, whatever. All those things could foreseeably come before you. Talking about the Kirkland mine, probably not, I'm gonna guess. Who knows? But again, so if you're talking about something that's probably not gonna come before you, then you can discuss this. Talking about whether Judge Kavanaugh gets a foot in the Supreme Court, have at it. Have that discussion, because no offense, but you're not gonna be involved in that decision, right? So those are things you just have to, but again, err on the side of caution, err on the side of openness, is what I always would say, if there's ever a question. So what's legal action? We should vote on this, we should do this, we should adopt this. You'll need to avoid talking about that. It's different. I'm getting it to, okay. These are some examples of proposed legal action. Councilman is moving to the hospital. We should install a crosswalk at First and Main. Now, if somebody said, we should discuss, and we should agendize whether we install a crosswalk at First and Main and stop there, that's fine. Because you're proposing an agenda item, but you shouldn't state your opinion as to why you want it on the agenda. And again, so be careful about that. Your policies about getting things on the agenda. I know there's some sort of ongoing discussion, deliberation, disputes, disagreements, whatever you call it, about that. And I'm not going to get into that specifically because it's my understanding that it's in front of the AG, and so I don't have time on that. But I would just say that whatever you ultimately do or decide, whether you leave policies in place or change them, if there's a process that gets something on an agenda, it should be done preferably, through either, let's say if you're going to put two people to get something on the agenda, it should be done through your staff person, rather through the chief or his staff, rather than to another board member. That's the best way to avoid having a discussion with the third person. Because if you say, we should discuss whether to install a crosswalk. So, why would you want to do that? Well, because people got hit the other day, and I think we need a crosswalk. Bam! You just proposed legal action. So it's always, if you can do it electronically, do it through your staff people, that's the best way to kind of avoid those problems. A couple of, I mean, these are clearly, one is not, proposing legal action. The other one's basically polling. Can I count on you for your vote? Trading votes, if you vote for mine, I'll vote for yours. Again, proposing legal action. Gotta be very careful. I don't think that goes on that much. But it's, you just have to be careful. This is a good one. This is a good sort of example of what I'm talking about. Hey, I got an article I want everybody to read what the fire district in Oregon is doing. I want to share with everybody. Versus, hey, we need to do what this fire district in Oregon is doing. That's proposing legal action. So again, the best way to share information, and I don't know exactly how you guys are structured, but I would run it through your staff person, don't email everybody else. Email the one or two staff people. Hey, please circulate this. I think we should do this, chief. Please circulate this. What's the chief going to write back? Hey, everybody, please read the article. It's not going to, Board member Jacobs says we should do this. He's not going to do that because that's suggesting legal action through your staff member, which you can't do, right? You can't use staff people to circumvent over meeting. So again, a couple of examples. We should fire the chief at the next meeting, or let's have the chief's personnel review. Right? One is clearly proposing legal action. The other is simply trying to get something on an agenda. So when in doubt, be careful. Use your staff people you want to circulate information to other board members. Get it, send it to your staff people. Then they would send it out to everybody. They would probably sanitize your opinions off of that email. Probably wouldn't forward it. They would probably save the document or reformulate it and then resend it out, kind of sanitize it. So if you have an opinion in there, it doesn't get sent on. Again, serial communication, we talked about that. That's just one person to another. It used to be letters, now it's email. And again, this is now in the statute. I think it was the last legislative session, if not the one 2 years ago, that actually they formalized it. But we've always treated email as a potential meeting. Because if you can attend a meeting on the phone, or you can attend a meeting by Skype or FaceTime, you can read Lynn's play-by-play as you're having a meeting. She does that. I don't know if she does it all, but she actually does it it's almost like on ESPN when you're seeing what's happening with the football game. Lynn does that, so you can actually attend the meeting that way, right? So if you can attend the meeting that way, you can obviously violate open meeting law that way too. Okay, so get rid of the reply all button on your email. This is just a refresher. If you can't do it in person, you can't do it by email or by phone or Skype or whatever. So we'll get it, if we have time, your emails, particularly if you're discussing board business, district business on email, those emails are public record. Even if you're using your Gmail account. Do you all have an official district email? Stick to that, always. You don't want to use your private email. It is a public record, and all of a sudden, if you use your private email, your Gmail account, whatever, so all of a sudden now you have retention requirements that your clerk's going to have to deal with. And I know this from firsthand experience, it can be subpoenaed if there's a lawsuit. And then they get to dig through all your emails and see what else you talked about. We had that experience a couple years ago. So the AG came out with this kind of weird opinion that said, well, if I use my own phone, it's not public record. And then the court said that's wrong. And so if you use your own phone for texting or emails or something like that, if you have a smartphone, It all becomes a public record if it's government business or if it's public business. Now, I will say this, I don't think anybody at the city has a city-issued phone, maybe a few exceptions for like fire and police, top levels. But everybody else uses their own phone for city business. So for the most part, we discourage people, you know, if you're gonna send a message, hey, can you meet at 3, that's fine, but let's not have a lot of discussion about, you know, the substance of it, because as we all know, the texts aren't retained, and you run into all these retention problems with text messages. The time that the text was sent, the to number or the from number are kept by your provider, but the message itself is probably not. And again, use your staff people to communicate with others, but don't try and get them to communicate your position. If you want to send information, if you want to try and agendize something, we should talk about this topic, get it, if you email your staff person or verbally tell your staff person, and they circulate it back out, that's the best way to avoid those kinds of serial communications. So basically, bottom line is you can have a meeting by email, you can violate open meeting law by email. There's no distinction between discussing facts and discussing opinions if there's quorum, because obviously when you're making policy votes, that's a lot of opinion, right? It's your opinion on how things should be. You know, you may base it on a set of facts, but opinions are that's the policy making part of it. So again, it's a little bit of a repetition, but you know, if you can't stress enough, if you use your staff people to get information out to the rest of the board, you're way better off than trying to share it amongst yourselves. Marcy?
No, just an itch, sorry.
Okay. But again, you know, don't put your staff in a weird position to get them to try and relay your opinion or what you want the outcome to be. Because, you know, I will tell you, depending on how seasoned your staff person is, it's not easy to tell, you know, your boss effectively, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, I mean, it takes some spine to do that. So a lot of maybe newer staff people may not be as courageous. So I'll get to the regular media stuff. Social networking. There's no real good answer about, you know, if you have Facebook or Twitter or whatever else out there, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever. So right now, unlike email, which is very clear, you can have a meeting, there isn't any clear law that says you can have a meeting by way of a Facebook page or a Twitter tweeting. My advice would be just be really careful about sort of opining on what you want to happen on your social media. Unless your social media is really private and I'm not sure that's even possible anymore, but because that stuff gets relayed. Now, if it's going to be board chairperson is going to be at this event on this day on her Facebook page, that's probably fine. And that's what I've told, like, for instance, our mayor and our councilpeople. Hey, if you're going to go to an event, have at it. You know, post it on your Facebook page. You're running for re-election. Go for it. And by the way, if you have a Facebook page for your election and a Facebook page for your person, make sure you keep those separately or keep those separate. I wouldn't tie them together. That's kind of a separate issue. So I guess I would just say you run the risk if you use your social media to promote potential outcome of stuff that's going to come for the board. Can't tell you that the AG or somebody's going to say, hey, this is a direct violation of a meeting law, because the law is kind of undetermined at this point, but why risk it? So again, can be serial. So because I'm not a big tactical guy, but you can take something and kind of forward it. So it's risky. I mean, I'll give you for instance, if you're gonna say, you know, our council do this all the time, hey, at tomorrow's council meeting, we're gonna be discussing and voting on this. You know, come on out and we want your opinion. Great, awesome. But if it's, hey, tomorrow we're going to be voting on this item, and I think this is the greatest thing for the city in 10 years, and I'm voting yes, and I want, if your support is coming out, and tell us how you support it too. That, is it an open meeting law violation? Maybe, maybe not, but it's risky. So, I mean,
John, getting back to your first example, though, telling people just, you know, hey, we're gonna be voting on this, and two other, or, you know, quorum council members like the post, wouldn't that be considered?
well, again, is the initial post suggesting what the outcome's gonna be, like posing an outcome, or is it just, hey, have this meeting, this is on there, we want the public there to comment, kind of thing? And two other council people say, yeah. I mean, probably not, but again, there's a risk involved. Just like, I mean, so the point of this is that social media can be, it could, it might create an open meeting law violation. So if you use social media, just be careful about it in the same way you would if it's an email. If you're, let's say you have a group of people you email to, of constituents, and you go, hey, we're talking about this topic tomorrow. We want the public input. I'd like to know what my constituents think. Please come to the meeting. And an email can be forwarded, and ultimately it could reach, you know, a quorum of people on this board. Probably not a problem, because you never said what you're proposing the outcome should be. But at the same time, if you say in an email, hey, I'm against this thing, I'm gonna vote against this, and I need you guys to all come out and back me up on this, and back up on why we should vote no. Well, then, if you do it in an email, and it gets to a majority, you probably propose a legal action. If you do it in a Facebook page or a tweet, I would say, I wouldn't do it. I mean, why run the risk, right? And again, the fallback is always do the public's business in public. Always do it openly. You have plenty of time. I mean, today you have from 1:30 to whenever to discuss public issues, right? So do it all, you know, if you want to encourage people to come out and speak or listen or whatever, that's awesome. But you have plenty of time to discuss or deliberate, propose, and try and convince your fellow board members to vote one way or the other at the public meeting, and that's the whole point. Kind of beat that off to death. So talk about this. Don't use staff to violate open meeting law. This is just some sort of etiquette things that I've learned. And so when you guys have your meetings, is this the setup? So your backs are to the audience?
No.
Oh, okay,
They're
okay.
facing this
I was
way.
gonna say, so I mean, that's gotta be rough, having people sit behind you. Okay, that makes sense to me then. This one here you see all the time. So before the meeting or after the meeting, particularly after the meeting, all of a sudden you see four council people kind of, you know, curl up in a little huddle and start talking. And I'll walk over like, if you guys are talking about where you're going for drinks, that's fine, but see all those people in the public? They don't know what you're talking about. So just kind of have to be careful about having sort of a post or a pre-meeting quorum, having a discussion. You could be discussing like the lemon bar recipe, but the public has no clue what you're talking about. So just, that's why, again, this is, part of this is practical, and part of this is hey, we have to earn the public's trust constantly, especially around here, right? When you're the government, you're constantly trying to prove to the public that you're trying to do the best you can do. So when you do little things like that, or using your cell phone, you know, texting while you're at a meeting, you know, the public sees it, they don't really know what it is you're doing. I would kind of avoid that. Okay, so a couple of specific things, social events. We do what are called courtesy agendas. If you're going to some event, you know, you just, hey, there may be a quorum present, no business is going to be discussed. Again, saying a lot of it's perception though. You gotta, if you're gonna kind of hang out together and there's three of you, you know, just kind of, again, be cautious about what it looks like to the public out there. Because they, for the most part, maybe it's healthy, maybe it's not, but there is a fundamental distrust of government at all levels, right? So don't give people any fodder to distrust government even more. Now, there's a sort of cutoff at some point. If it's purely a social event, somebody's daughter's getting married and you know, you have a quorum of people present there, I'm not sure I would necessarily post that, because all of a sudden you get people showing up at the reception waiting for the free prime rib, right? I mean, because technically this is inviting those folks to that public event. Sometimes the events are ticketed, sometimes there's a fee. Doesn't mean people get in for free, but you just gotta have to be somewhat careful about where that cutoff is. Okay, so this is kind of getting to the media issue. So if one of your board members is going to give a public presentation, a public speech, and it's about board business, if you're going to be talking about board business and you're going to have two other people there, you probably need to post it as, at a minimum of courtesy, maybe even as a meeting. Because you're talking board business and you're maybe proposing things that you want to see the board do. So you just have to be, again, this is the most cautious approach to things. Now, the exception to this rule would be if it's a pure campaign event and you're running for re-election, you don't necessarily have to post or should post any kind of agenda, because I think there is a distinction between that. But if you're just going to, you know, we have, for instance, council people that go to a lot of the senior assisted living type places, and they have neighborhood meetings or group meetings, and oftentimes there'll be a quorum, you know, and they're talking about city business, or the mayor's giving a state of the city speech. Well, the whole council's there. We post it as a regular meeting and say, you know, just list the state of the city speech. Because obviously he's going to talk about city stop and what his vision for the city is for the next year. Nothing wrong with, you know, can't hurt to do that. Specific question about Steve Blair, for instance. So talking to the media, there's a very specific exception. If the reporter is asking a elected official, so this is on the agenda for tomorrow, how do you think you're going to vote? Now, the best answer is, I want to hear the presentation and I want to hear from the public. I haven't made up my mind, or something to that effect. But if somebody's adamantly, I'm for this, I don't care what anybody says, I want this thing to go forward, and they say, I'm voting for this thing, and I hope my fellow council members or fellow board members agree with me. That is an exception to open meeting law. Even if the other board members or council members read the paper. Because it's that First Amendment, you know, kind of trumps, to some degree, open meeting law. So they do have that right. So by sort of extrapolation, if I can talk to the reporter as an elected official and say, I'm voting this way, then I could have my own radio show and say, this is what I think should happen. And I think that the other sort of rationale behind it is, not more than sort of the theoretical First Amendment, is everybody has access to it. Everybody has access to the newspaper. Everybody has access to listen to the radio show if they choose to. So it's not like it's done kind of in any kind of private setting. It's very open. It's very accessible. Whether, you know, so they can read the paper online, they can get paper, they can listen to the radio. So I think that's kind of the more practical explanation too, is it's not done in any kind of secret or overt way. And I will tell you, I mean, I've seen it happen where Councilman X or Councilperson X says, I'm voting for this thing, and they're in the paper a week before the item or a couple days before the item comes up, and by God, by the time they're done with me, they're voting the other way. Because somebody convinced them to change their mind. So, you know, it's always, you can have very strong sort of philosophical or policy views, and you may be committed to voting for something, but there may be somebody comes in and says something that, you know, one of your fellow board members says something that they change your mind on the item. Or it's adjusted, it's amended, things are fine-tuned or something like that. So, so just because it's said in the paper doesn't necessarily mean that's where they're going to vote. All right, so these are some things to be careful with when you talk to the media. favorite is the Abraham Lincoln quote. Because there's no internet, they were looking at it. All right. So, a little bit about the public's rights. Public can attend, listen, tape record, videotape. We have a sign-in card, for speaker card, that we ask people to sign. We ask them to put, their name, their address, city, phone number. But they don't have to put anything in it. They just put John Doe, right? It helps our clerks kind of track who's speaking and where they're from. For the most part, they're from Prescott, but just because they write down Prescott doesn't necessarily mean they live in the city. But we can't mandate they do that. That's kind of part of the public hearing or public process. What the public doesn't have the right to do, certainly, is can't disrupt. And they don't have necessarily the right to speak, except unless there's one of two things happens. It's a required public hearing, or the board chair determines he or she's going to take public comment on that. And then certainly, I think you guys have limited time, what, 2 minutes or 3 minutes? 3 minutes, what do you say? For a formal presentation, we allow for 5, for a public speaker, we allow 3. And you can hold them to it. Get your message out in 3 minutes. We have a little light that comes on, green, yellow, red. And once that light hits red, we're told to wrap it up. And some people decide the time limit doesn't apply to me, and they keep going, and they're basically sort of gavel down. So you're done, sit down. You've gone a minute or more over. And there's a balance between, a time limit and, nicely asking someone, okay, wrap it up, and being a jerk. And I've seen some mayors and others just cut people off at 3 minutes, sit down, yelling at them, and this is not the way to deal with the public. So, got to be a little bit diplomatic. So, wrapping up, resolve doubts in favor of openness. So, and we all know if you take an action that's not agendized, it's basically null and void, means you have to go there. There is a simple solution, and that's called ratification. You just re-agendize the item and have another public discussion on it. As long as you follow the laws, you can simply ratify the item. If for some reason you may have technically, inadvertently made a mistake. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the open meeting law portion. Happy to keep going to briefly talk about public records and conflicts, unless you have any questions or any other comments. Yes, ma'am.
I have a few questions just for
Okay.
clarification. Courtesy agendas, they're not statutorily required.
No.
So we do them for just about everything.
Okay.
If someone from the board calls us and says, hey, we're gonna be at the RWAP meeting and there's gonna be 3 or 4 of us, we put it on there.
That's right.
But you mentioned something about some things are ticketed, some things are
Right.
private events.
So for instance, the implication of the courtesy agenda is, hey, public, you should know that a majority of your board or majority of your council is going to be at this event. And if you want to go, you're free to go. But that doesn't get them in free to a ticketed event or an event that costs a fee. And at some point, I just think there's a practical cutoff that if it's a personal party, and you have a quorum, say I have my Christmas party and I invite the council, hey, come on over, Christmas cocktail, whatever. And 4 or 5 show up, I'm not putting it out on the agenda. I mean, because again, there's no city business being discussed, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want my street address and publicize. So there's just kind of a practical cutoff that we discuss with the clerk when we do that. If it's a purely sort of personal, event, party, something. So, but for the most part, it's 99% of the time, yeah, we post those things. But yeah, if it's an RUP event, or if it's some other event that, if it's the Oktoberfest and it costs you $40 to get in, well, we may post an agenda because we have a majority of council there, but that doesn't mean the public can just show up and get in for free. You gotta pay the $40 to get in.
So
I
do we
mean,
need a disclaimer that
Nah,
says that?
no, because again, it's just a hey, heads up.
Just a comment.
And I think the most important is, yeah, this part here. No city business, no board business is gonna be discussed. It's gonna be a social event, it's gonna be whatever. It's gonna be, you know, Republic Women, you know, it's gonna be the Attorney General is gonna be talking about something, or this candidate's gonna be talking about something. And in these events, again, a lot of it's perception. You know, you want to kind of mingle with other people. You don't necessarily want to sit at the same table. So, you know, if you can avoid it. I don't know if it's like if seating's already arranged as a group, you know, you're kind of stuck with that. But, you know, kind of want to break it up a little bit so you don't have a quorum at the same table. Because again, there's two things. There's temptation in talking about business, particularly if somebody from the public wants to talk to you about it. And then the second, which I think is the bigger, is simply the perception that, oh, there's a quorum at that table. What they're talking about, right? So, but I think if you put that disclaimer on there, no board business, no district visit will be discussed, I think you're good. And we do ours. I mean, it's a rolling list. I mean, because, you know, there's an infinite number of events going on, and things going on that you can attend, and so, we do, even if we only have a commitment from, say, 2, we'll still post it on a courtesy agenda, because who knows, at the last minute, somebody changes their mind, and ends up going for some reason. Okay, so let's talk a little bit quickly about public records. I mentioned earlier, you know, about using your cell phones, using your Gmail, all those kinds of things. So just like there's a presumption of openness for meetings, there's a presumption of public access to government documents or in favor of disclosure. The balancing test here is confidentiality, privacy, or best interest in the state. So every year at the legislature, there's a fight about kind of ratcheting back some of the public records requests, particularly the ones that want like 5,000 pages of documents. And we get those pretty regularly. Not so regularly. We get those every once in a while, and they're just burdensome. But every year, the Arizona Republic and some of the media fight it, and every year it seems to lose. Did I do that?
No, I'll move something over here to stop you.
So basically, as a general rule, all of the documents you maintain for district business or public records, whether public records or other matters. Personnel files are all public records. It shocks employees to know that their personnel file is not their file. It's the public's file, the public has access to it. Now, of course, there are exceptions and things that can be removed, but the government's files are basically accessible by the public. And if anybody's ever dealt with like FOIA, our open meeting or our public records are so much more straightforward and simple. And FOIA has so many more exceptions and rules. It's very, very complicated. So, for good or bad, this is what we're stuck with. So basically, all of the records that you create, receive, maintain, those are all basically public records. So, what are some of the things that you can withhold? Well, something that's confidential. We talked earlier about, say, a PSPRS board, talking about a firefighter's health records. Obviously, that's part of that person's file. It's a public record, but it's deemed confidential, and you wouldn't disclose that. Certain disciplinary actions would be withheld as confidential. Certainly, like for instance, we have a fight going on with people requesting information, plans and designs for all of our water infrastructure. And unfortunately, there's a specific law that was adopted a few years back that says we can withhold all that stuff because it's considered critical infrastructure. And you do not want the public, especially people who have bad intentions, to figure out how to get into your water supply and do something that they shouldn't be doing. So those are considered confidential type documents. Obviously, personal identifying information in a personnel file is confidential. So if somebody says, hey, I want the chief's personnel file. Well, you're not just gonna hand it over, you're gonna redact that home address, phone number, social security number, and anything that's sort of deemed personal identifying information, or PII, you wanna redact that out, and then and maybe pull a document out, whatever, and then you can hand the file over. So, again, you can't use it to avoid inconvenience or embarrassment, but I think there are a lot of legitimate reasons why, why things are being confidential. The classic example was a case that came out, I think Mesa, where there was a 911 call, and apparently, I think it was a little kid who drowned, and it was just this really traumatic phone call, and I think Channel 3 wanted the tape, and Mesa PD, or dispatch, gave him a transcript and said, here, you can have the transcript, we're not gonna give you the tape because it's way too traumatic. And the court backed him up on it. They said, this is, so the confidentiality was all the emotion that was tied to the actual phone call versus the transcript. So there are things like that, that are sort of confidential or balanced, the public's right to know versus privacy or what's in the government's best interest. So that's kind of it for public records. I know that there's an issue that you're dealing with things that are sort of unduly burdensome, like large volume requests. And those are always tough because, you can't recoup your costs unless it's a commercial request. And most people want it electronically, so you can maybe charge them for the cost of the thumb drive. But it could be hundreds of hours of staff time. And there's a constant battle. This is part of the legislation, what the legislature's been trying to deal with, to somehow create some level of restriction. It just hasn't been able to pass. But I think part of the solution we've had is sometimes people are just doing it to create a burden. I mean, I think there's those requests. Other times, I don't think they even know what they're requesting. So what we tell people, and there's a case that came out recently that said, hey, that request you made, you don't get any of it until the last page is ready. So if you have a 5,000 document request, the case law, the Court of Appeals said, until the city or the government has no obligation to piecemeal distribute this thing out. So this is, so your response is something like, you're requesting over 5,000 documents. It's probably going to take us 6 to 9 months to actually go through this thing. And you'll get your request at the end when everything is ready. Do you want to narrow your request down a little bit? And some people go, oh, I didn't realize it was that big. And other people go, no, I'll wait. And so, and the government's burden is promptly, right? There's no time limit. We have to promptly respond to public records requests. So, to me, there's two things about that. We promptly respond within 24 hours, say, hey, we got your request. That's a prompt response. To actually provide the documents depends on how big the document is. If it's a single page, people can go to the counter and say, I want a copy of a building permit. Well, here you go. Or I want a police report, I was in an accident. Here you go. But we have an online system now where people can make public records requests. And probably about 80% of our requests come through the city website. And so we'll automatically respond within 24 hours. Got your public records request with a estimated time of when it's available. Some people will request paper, and we tell them it's 25 cents a page. Would you rather have it emailed to you? I don't want to give my email address to the government, that kind of stuff. So it's like, okay. We'll also request, if it's voluminous, a deposit, because oftentimes you have to make a copy, you have to print out a hard copy, redact it, and then make another copy. You can only charge them for the one copy, but you've made 3, right? So, that's, if I don't know how much it costs to make a copy, we charge 25 cents a page, but that's strictly for the ink and the paper and the toner, right? So, there are sort of ways around it. I think, I think at some point, if the request is so overly burdensome that you just don't have the staff to respond, I think you may have a good argument that this is overly burdensome. It may be worth the litigation, put it that way, because ultimately, if somebody's really adamant about getting something, they can sue you, and if they win, they get attorney's fees. So there's always that balance too. Or if it's a media request, particularly Arizona Republic, they've got this guy named David Botany on call. And the minute you say to the media, like Arizona Republic or the Courier or somebody else, hey, she hasn't done it to us yet. But it's like, hey, we're not releasing this, or we're only releasing this. You get a letter from David Botany. You're violating this or like that. So, for instance, when we had doing our big, we had a bunch of, if you didn't know this, a bunch of sober homes in Prescott for a while. And I think it was the Courier, Arizona Republic said, well, we want a list of all the sober homes you have and all the addresses. I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna give that to you, because there's gotta be some privacy, some HIPAA, there's, just sort of trying to, find that balance between public right to know, and so within a day, we get a demand letter from Gavin and David Bobby, and we actually negotiated a deal. We'll give you the list, but you can't publish it. They said, okay, that's fine, because they just wanted the information as background. They didn't want to publish this list, because at the time, if you recall, it was a pretty volatile situation. We weren't only afraid of sort of privacy issues, we were afraid of the torches and pitchforks, showing up at these houses. Right? So there was a little bit of public safety concern. So, but those things are, kind of like open meetings. It is an ongoing kind of analysis, and it's very sort of fact specific as to how you respond. Conflict of interest stuff, real quick. Okay, so obviously it applies to all you. It applies to all you. It doesn't apply to you, Lynn, I think. But, so obviously all public employees, all officials are subject to conflict of interest law. So, simple answer is, if you have a financial or a business interest, or a member of your family has a financial or business interest in a decision of the agency, you have to recuse yourself. You can't participate, and to me, it's you can't participate on either side. So, even though you're sort of still a member of the public, you should avoid, I'm trying to think of an example, but let's say you as let's say the district wants to buy a piece of property, and you as a board member have an interest in the property. Let's say your family, there's 6 of you that own property, and you're one of 6. You as the public official shouldn't be involved in the discussion. You should just defer to the other owners or hire an agent or something like that, because you shouldn't really participate in either side of that discussion. Certainly you can't vote on it, but again, there's a perception issue of an insider deal. You have to disclose what the interest is, and again, you recuse yourself. Now, if you give your attorney enough advance notice, he or she can write an actual opinion letter, which is filed with the clerk, and it's public. If you wait until the day of the meeting, you're going to get a verbal. You're entitled to rely on that opinion, only to the extent, only to the extent that you've disclosed all of the critical facts. So if I have a board member or a council member says, hey, I might have an interest in this deal. I live down the street from this rezoning, and I'm on the planning commission, and is this going to, do I have a conflict of interest? And you go, well, no, you're falling to the exception. We'll talk about this into the class exception. You're one of 50 people live within, a half-a-mile radius of this project, so it affects your property to the same degree. It's a remote interest. You don't have it. Come to find out later, that planning commissioner actually, has a 10% interest in the property. Okay, the first part of the opinion you can rely on, but your failure to disclose to me a critical piece of information, you have a conflict. You didn't tell me enough information, so you are basically violating the law. Now that was purely hypothetical. That's never happened. So again, pecuniary means money, proprietary means business, other than a remote interest. So here's some questions to ask yourself. And when I do this for my council or my boards and commission members, I tell them this: I don't expect you to know the answer, right? I don't expect you to know whether you have a conflict of interest or not. What I do kind of hope is that you come out of this thinking, I wonder if I have a conflict of interest. I should ask the attorney, and that attorney then will give you an opinion. So if you can spot the issue, it's our law school term, spot the issue. That's all you really need to do here. You're better off not coming up with the answer on your own. Because once you rely, again, if you disclose to the attorney all of the relevant facts, and the attorney says no conflict of interest, you're entitled to rely on that and vote, and there's no liability on your part because you disclosed it, you've gotten an opinion, and you're entitled to rely on it. So, relatives, let's see if we have that list here. Does it affect me or my relatives? Is there a monetary or property or business interest? Is it one that's not a remote interest? Those are the questions. So if you have a substantial conflict, you refrain from voting, you participate in the decision, you have to disclose it. My recommendation is, hey, just leave the room, and then when the item's done, you can come back in. Then that's just it's sort of the appearance thing. So you may have an interest in something, but it's minor or remote, so you're still allowed to participate. These are remote interests. So if you're going to be dealing with, say, a nonprofit, and you're a board member of a nonprofit, and you're entering into a contract, and you're not compensated, then it's a remote interest. Landlord tenant, nonprofit marketing, so like if you're a member of the Chamber of Commerce, for instance, that would be one that you could be a member of that. If you're voting, again, these are sort of more city specific, but if we're voting on a cell tower for AT&T, and I have, I have stock in AT&T, I get to vote on it because it's so remote. I'm one of a billion people who have stock in that. And then again, less than 3% of the shares of the corporation, unless the income is more than 5% of your total income. But again, these are issues that you're not supposed to come up with the answer on your own. You just have to get the answer from the attorney. The group of 10, the group of 12, that's a class interest. You're making a decision, it's going to affect the neighborhood somehow. So you're building a new fire station, and you live in the neighborhood. Well, you and 150 other people. So you don't have a conflict, most likely, because it doesn't affect you any more than it affects a group of 10 or larger. If you're right next door, you may have potential conflict. If it can be reasonably said that purchase of this land affects the value of your property, let's say, for instance. But again, those are issues that you would want to flesh out. Okay. So family is wife, kids, mother and father, brothers and sisters. Pretty sure. There may be more. But, so in other words, if it's not your interest, but it's one of your family members, then you also have a conflict of interest, right? Because you don't want to benefit family members. If it's close, again, it violates a conflict of interest law, but we have this thing called the appearance of impropriety, right? We always have that as a fallback. That even though it may not technically violate the conflict of interest law, it's the appearance of impropriety. This looks bad. Looks bad for you. It looks bad for the board. It creates more distrust in government that you're self-dealing somehow. You're doing a deal that's going to benefit somebody like a cousin. So you always have that as an example. That is a small p political decision or a personal decision. It's not purely legal. What I've always advised is, hey, if you think this looks bad for you, it probably does, you should recuse yourself. Now, I always tell people at the same time, you can't use this to get out of something because you don't want to vote on it, right? I mean, sometimes you have to make the tough vote. You may be the swing vote, and you're not going to weasel out because you have this such a weird remote interest that you want to say, well, it looks bad, who cares, right? You know, that's something that it takes some talking to. So, you know, it's one of those things. So these are, okay, so this remote interest. Don't take gifts if you can, you know, I don't know if you have I didn't see it, you probably do have some sort of gift policy? No? Do you have a gift policy? Probably should have a gift policy.
They all get given to me.
Yeah.
I don't
So,
think we've
for
ever been
instance-
offered a gift.
Yeah,
Well-
nobody's ever offered a gift.
Well, okay,
It's
so.
never come up.
Normally, like, we have I think it's a $50 gift
District,
policy.
but not-
So we can't accept a gift.
Yeah, I think there's a district-wide policy in that regard, but not
But not a
specifically
board
boards.
policy.
Okay, so you probably have a certain dollar threshold where you can't accept a gift. Statewide, it is very specific. There's one that says you can't take any tickets to any sporting events. It only applies to state level officers and legislators and not local government. But again, you gotta be cautious about it, gifts. For instance, if around the holidays, oftentimes you have vendors or contractors that will sit there and deliver like a big basket of fruit or a bunch of cookies. You can accept the gift, the only is gonna share them with the office or share them with the group. So, you know, don't just hog them and take them home with you. We have a very specific rule of Prescott that anybody who gets a gift of liquor has to turn it over to the city attorney's office for safekeeping. So,
Seems pretty reasonable.
we hold on to it for as long as necessary.
Texas rule there.
So again, this is the default here, just like, you know, on public records, open meeting is error on the side of openness. The default here is, I might have a conflict of interest, I should get an opinion. And as long as you disclose relevant facts, you're entitled to rely on the opinion, you have no liability. And there's two ways it can be done. I mentioned, if there's enough advance notice, the attorney can write a formal opinion, it's filed with the clerk, and that gives you basically immunity from anything. The other way, if it happens sort of late in the game, if it's shortly before a meeting, you're pretty much going to get a verbal opinion. You know, if you're going to recuse yourself, you just, you know, chairperson, I have a conflict of interest, or I have a potential conflict of interest on this issue, I'm going to recuse myself, and you get up and walk out. If it's the other way, it's really sort of your personal call, whether you want to sort of have that public discussion with the attorney at the meeting. In other words, we spoke with the attorney, I said, you know, I have these, I thought might be a conflict, and Mr. Attorney, what was your opinion? And the attorney says, well, determine that based on those facts, you don't have a conflict of interest. And you kind of put it on the record. That's kind of a personal decision, it's not mandated. Some of it, you know, it's just for disclosure purposes. So what are the remedies? Obviously, every contract is 38.511 provision. This is if anybody who voted on this or participated in this benefits from it, this can be voided. You know, so you can void the contract. People who are affected by the conflict, in other words, somebody who didn't get the deal, or somebody who, like a vendor or contractor, can sue. And then, of course, attorney's fees and costs, which are payable by you, not the board, not the district, right? So if you violate open meeting, or conflicts of interest, you may be stuck with fees and costs in addition to, these are pretty, I mean, you have to be pretty, felony is gonna be bribe taking, you know, something pretty serious. Misdemeanor is gonna be, you know, something where you had a conflict and you didn't disclose it, may have been inadvertent, but even then, I'm not sure I've seen, I mean, obviously other than bribes and stuff, where it's just a kind of straight out conflict. But certainly the AG's office can come in and say, you're no longer on this board, because you violate conflicts on close. So, that finishes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
I have one more
Yes, ma'am.
question back to open meeting.
Okay?
You mentioned that you guys put the staff memos online.
Yeah.
Are you guys required to do that? They're not required, for us, it's not
Actually,
statutorily required. What's required is the notice.
Right, so, well, we have the notice and agenda, right? The notice is basically, there's a meeting at this date, you know, on this time, in this place. And then the agenda is one document.
Yes.
What we do is we post the staff memos, the packets we call them, on the website, which means we don't have to print them out. Because people from the public will go there and go, they want to read something from agenda. Well, if you get 50 people and the packets are like that sometimes, it gets worse. The fact of the matter is we actually have convinced 5 out of 7, 6 out of 7 to go electronic. They have laptops or tablets. And only 2 require, well, 1 requires paper, won't use the computer. And the other one's both, laptop and paper. So, but I'm telling you, it saves you a ton of money if you don't have to print out, you know, agendas for, you know, the staff people, the manager, me, the clerk, you know, if you can do it electronically. So that's why we do it online. Obviously, we have our reasonable accommodation. If somebody can't use the online, we'll provide them with a hard copy, but pretty rare.
So we post ours, we post our packets online as well. However, we've been criticized in the past for certain documents not being included, whether it was because they were under legal advice or they were received late or something. So I just wanted to clarify that
Okay, so
we
you're-
do it as a
Yeah.
matter of remaining
Right,
transparent,
your
not
packet, which
statutory.
means all of your memos, staff memos and background is all part of, it's online accessible. And yeah, well, we have that same thing, you know, if some document comes in late, like an exhibit to a contract, for instance, we'll present that at the council meeting on the Elmo, you know, it's the big overhead projector. This is exhibit B, it wasn't available until yesterday. You know, obviously, the packet was published on Thursday. So if you approve this contract, this is what exhibit B looks like a site plan or something. Clearly, if it's legal advice or some privileged or confidential document, no, it wouldn't go online at all. It's privileged. You know, it's a privileged document. So we don't put, like for exec sessions, we have, if our agenda has all the things on the agenda, and then it has this boilerplate at the bottom that says, at any time, on any item, the council can vote to go to exec session and just cites the statute. But then we'll have specific exec sessions scheduled when we know, hey, we need to talk about some
Real estate transaction.
real estate transaction, we know it's going on. We just post the agenda and no packet, no information. Because basically, what we do is we hand out the information. Sometimes the council gets their read ahead, depend. But other times it's like, hey, here's information, go through your PowerPoint, present, you know, have some discussion, get some direction, collect it all back up. You don't get to take it with you. I mean, technically, they could, you could take your documents with you, but for some reason, our council decides, I don't want this, here, take it back. You know, some will keep it for reference material, but I think some of them are afraid, you know, that it'll get out. So, but, you know, no, legal, like confidential or privileged documents would not be something you want to post online, obviously.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can do hand raised.
Did I? I forgot what it was.
So, anything else?
Am
Yes,
I allowed to
ma'am.
ask a question?
Yeah, it's up to the board chairperson.
Sure. Thank you. So on today's meeting, there's a thing about 7 vehicles being surplused. Okay. But it doesn't give what vehicles are being surplused. The only information is given in the minutes from last month's meeting, and it still doesn't tell what the vehicles are being surplused. Are those things that should be in the agenda? Because I know Prescott does that.
Not on the agenda.
Well, in the packet, yeah.
Yes. So the agenda would say something, so your surplus, I mean, you're selling off 7
Yeah,
vehicles?
we have some engines, some older engines that are being surplused out.
Okay, so what does that mean? Give it to another
They're
firm?
being, so the board gave us direction to get a bid to sell
Okay.
them all off.
Right.
And so now we have a contract, a potential purchaser, so we need to discuss that
Right.
agreement with the
Right.
board so they can make a decision.
So you would list out, and it's appropriate to me, agenda item would be surplusing of 7 fire trucks or whatever, to, maybe to whom, or discussion, possible action on selling 7 vehicles, you know. And then your packet material would have presumably the description of the vehicles, the potential purchase price, and that kind of stuff. I would say that you don't have to put that on your agenda, because, my God, you have like a 50-page agenda.
Right. But it could be, it should be in the packet, or you would
I would
recommend
assume
it?
it's in packet, you have a concept.
Depends on the, if I may,
Yeah.
depends on the status of the negotiations.
Right.
So we're not, at this stage, I'm not going to make suggestions which might be characterized as legal advice in open meeting. We've addressed those issues and.
So this isn't even then necessary for final action, this would be just discussion, kind of?
Possible
Yeah.
action depending on what the board
Yeah.
decides.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, it's so specific, that's the, I mean,
Yeah, it's tough
every,
to say.
when you're talking about, again, agendas, conflicts of interest, all this stuff, it's, you know, we could sit here till God knows what time and go over like specific things, well, what about this, what about this? And it's just, you know, it's very difficult to sort of, you know, you try to do an hour and a half training broadly enough, 2 hours, you know, training broadly enough, but if you start to get into every little what if or hypothetical, I mean, and the problem is you change one fact, and that's where, again, you know, that's where having a basic understanding is great, but you change one fact, and all of a sudden the answer's different, right? Like a conflict of interest question or an open meeting law question, one element could change the outcome of the analysis. So it's not supposed to be complicated, but lawyers got the hold of it and it's complicated, right? I mean, it's just the way it's the way law is. I mean, we all like to think that that everything could just be easy and open and no problem, but obviously it doesn't. You know, it just doesn't work that way. Things are, you know, things like this, somewhat it can get complicated. Sometimes it's an easy answer, sometimes it's complicated. So that's the best I can tell you. I mean, I think, by the way, you know, if the agenda, just as, like you said, the general rule is, does the public have a basic idea of what's going to be discussed? And if it's surplusing 7 vehicles, that's pretty, even if you just said that, that's pretty descriptive of what you're going to be talking about. You know, you're not, you know, if under that topic, you're buying 3 vehicles, that's probably a no-no, right? Because 2 very different activities. So selling off of, you know, we, like for instance, we sell off old vehicles while we have an auction. We have an item that says, you know, approval to send 7 vehicles to auction. We may list the auction house or something.
But in your packet, you always list which items you're,
Yeah, because that's usually for a final decision, right? So it's usually a contract or something. We're gonna send these 7 vehicles to this auction house. We estimated the value of each is over $3,000. So by charter, we have to sell them publicly. But, you know, if it's a broader discussion about how to sell vehicles or what process we should use, then you wouldn't necessarily have to list the specific vehicle. So I don't know what the agenda says, but, you know, it all depends on how far along you are in the process. If you're going to approve a contract to do something, you know, the contract probably would be in the packet. But I'll tell you, for instance, when we do our public works projects, we don't put our contracts in the packet necessarily because they're the same public works form contract every time. You know, we have a standard form, you know, street construction project contract. So we don't necessarily put that in. It's a, you know, if somebody requests a copy, we'll be happy to provide it. There's no secret to it. You know, so.
Are we statutorily required to provide packets to the public?
No. Notice an agenda. So, I mean, I think you do as a practice just because it gives people access to some of the details so
Put
that
it on the
they're
website.
informed, you know, about what maybe some of the, you know, drilling down some of the details are.
Right.
But the notice and agenda. So, to me, by providing the packet, you know, online, you know, if you go online to City Prescott, you'll go, council meeting for tomorrow, and it'll say, notice an agenda, packet. You can click on one link or the other link. And the nice thing about having the packet there is, if somebody goes, well, I read your agenda and I didn't understand what you guys were talking about, well, did you go to the next link over? Because the packet pretty much went into like a 17-page detail of what was going to be discussed. So it just makes it more accessible to people. It's not mandated, but it's a good idea to put as much information in your packet as you know and as you're legally allowed to disclose. Obviously, if they're, like we talked about earlier, if something's come out in an exec session and it's an approval of a settlement agreement, you know, it's got to be sort of find the right balance, because if you agendize, we're going to settle this case for $1 million as the defendant, and you disclose something in that packet 3 days before that the reason we're settling is because our driver was high on cocaine, well, guess what the plaintiff's lawyers are going to do? We're going to cancel that settlement, we want more money, right? I mean, so obviously there are, you know, you got to kind of find that common sense kind of balance to things like that.
We work on that every month.
Say what?
We work on that every month.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's if your goal is sort of continual improvement, constant improvement, you're doing it right. You know, you can always find ways to do it better. I'm always working with our clerk on how to post things better, get things out sooner. She's a slave driver when it comes to, you know, she's hard on the deadline. If you don't have it in, if the staff doesn't have it in to her by the Tuesday preceding the Tuesday, you're not going to get it on the agenda. Because she's got to we got to do the agenda review on Wednesday, and she publishes it on Thursday.
Yeah, you're every week, you're tight.
We're every other week, but our cycle
Oh,
is.
work study and council.
Yeah, we do a study session and a voting session back to back. And then we have an off week, but the off week is the deadline week to get stuff in, because, you know, she wants to get it out to the council on Thursday, to the public on Thursday, Friday, because the council wants time to read this stuff, you know, and you get a book that big, and if you're one of those people who likes to read it all, and you get it on Thursday or you get it on Friday or Saturday, then yes, you know, I don't have time to read this thing. Why am I voting on something? I have other things to do, you know, not to sit here and read a 200, 300-page agenda packet. I get it on, and technically we could hand it out on Monday before 3, right? But that's not, so we have a pretty tight deadline going every week. So again, sometimes things just don't make it on there. And you can always amend packets or amend the, you know, at the council meeting itself. As long as it's not, I mean, you can add things to it, as long as it doesn't fundamentally change what you're going to be talking about, then you can always, I mean, we had ordinances that are, you know, amended on the floor. You know, we have an ordinance draft, and then the council wants to approve it, but they want to make a change to it. So we let them I move to approve ordinance number 2018 something with the following language added to section B. And we'll approve that then and there.
Had similar things happen here,
Yeah.
or agenda items that came up on an emergency basis that had to be added, or even
Right.
issued a follow-up agenda to capture it.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And
we'll try
sometimes,
not to
you
stray
know,
too
and
far.
that becomes kind of a business decision, where if something's just needs so much change to it, or is fundamentally changing, sometimes the best, unless it's a really urgent or an emergency, sometimes the best decision is, well, let's just put it off to the next meeting, and we'll clean it up. And that happens all the time.
We've done that as well.
Sometimes the contract isn't ready. You know, council says, hey, I'm going to spend the $7.2 million on this street. Well, you know, we're putting in curbs and gutter. Or so, I don't, you know, and that's too much. And then they pull it, and it comes back about a month later, and it's downsized or right-sized or whatever, and it comes back. So, I mean, that happens a lot. So you can only do what you can do. You know, you make your best effort in terms of packets and things.
One thing you didn't clarify is that with the city of Prescott, you don't do the open call to the public, but you do take comments before every agenda item, or almost every agenda
No,
item.
we actually don't. It's up to the mayor in our case.
Yeah.
Unless it's a mandated public hearing. For instance, when we do study sessions, usually 2 to 3 items. And Probably rarely do we take comment on study session, because study session is to inform the council, or in your case, the board. That's what our study sessions are for, or work sessions, whatever you call them. When it comes to the actual voting session, we'll probably have upwards of a dozen items on consent, and we take no comment on those. Unless somebody, even if one of the council members wants to pull an item off consent to discuss, we probably don't take comment on that. And then, we'll take, as a general rule, we'll take comment or public comment on all of the individual voting items. But that's not mandated, that's just a practice to get public feedback, and we don't get a whole lot of public comment, to be honest with you. I mean, on certain items, we'll get a whole bunch, and other items, people will come out of the woodwork and complain about a, $50,000 something. And then the very next item is like a $7.5 million construction project, and it's just crickets. So go figure why, what motivates people to come up and want to comment on an item, so. But we have I don't know if you have speaker cards, we tend to use those, it's kind of nice to keep track. Also keeps the queue down, because before we did those, you'd have, people lined up and they'd almost get into fights over, particularly on one item, one thing that went on for a while, over who was next. Because some people wanted to sort of strategically place themselves in line to be the last speaker, and then people get, it's weird that they weren't fighting over who got to speak first, who got to speak last, who got the last word in. So, but we have sort of an internal or council policy on things which can change with the council. It's much less sort of formal than your policy about meetings and stuff. So we really only recently came up with, it used to be a 5-minute rule for public speakers. Whew. I'm telling you, on a busy agenda, it takes a long time. So 3 seems to work. Glendale was 2. And then our speaker card thing is relatively newly introduced, and that helps a lot too. So like I said, you're always kind of looking for ways to streamline the meeting, make it more efficient, at the same time making sure you're kind of cognizant of open meeting law and all that stuff.
You put your consent agenda on the screen too before they vote on
Yeah.
it.
Rather than, our clerk used to have to read the consent agenda, it would take like 25 minutes sometimes. So we just post it on the screen, and then if it's an ordinance, we have to read the caption, so that's a separate consent. We also did the greatest thing ever, the state legislature, this is totally off topic, state legislature said, hey, those special event liquor licenses that used to have to be approved by council, they can delegate it to the clerk. Well, we've removed like every week 15 items, because we have 15 special event approvals almost every week from about February through July, because it's every weekend there's like a half a dozen special events, and they all involve liquor licenses for some reason. Which I always thought was funny, ironic that we were known for having sober homes and Whiskey Row and special liquor events more than any other city in the state. So we seem to have a circular economy there.
Nothing to do with that issue about gifts of liquor must be stored at the city
That's
attorney.
exactly why. So, well, it's been my pleasure being here. Hopefully it was educational and entertaining somewhat. And I wish you the best.
Thanks so much, sir.